But here I was asked to talk about basic income, automation, and the elimination of poverty. Well, I talked about the elimination of poverty. Now, let me transition into the automation thing. Now, you notice, though, when I give a speech, when I give that speech anyway, it comes with a lot of moral outrage at the system we have, which makes me very different than the way Yang stuff. I watch Yang and I see he gets a lot of the same questions I do, because a lot of what he's talking about is basic income, and he answers them so differently than I would, at least in his tone. He portrays it as just simple, non-judgmental, non-confrontational problem solving. Well, we have this problem, here's the solution. If you think, here's a solution we could all agree on. And that has pluses and minuses. The way he does that allows people to sometimes, and it does put your audience a little more at ease than mine does, I think, if you're not sympathetic. To begin with, but it also allows people who think of themselves from left to center to think that he's some sort of like technocratic apologist or something like that. So it has pluses or minuses. Everybody, I think the diversity of this movement is its strength. The diversity of the basic income movement, that Yang is only a part of. The fact that there's people from all these different angles arguing for it in all these different ways for all these different reasons, I think keeps us from being cultish, but it also brings more people to it from different angles. But I do think there is an angle for what Andrew Yang is doing, because and the one thing of mine that he actually quotes is about the least radical thing I've ever said about basic income, which was actually inspired by a 10-year-old child, and that is that the market, basic income can just be a market economy where income doesn't start at zero. That's not a big radical change. That's all we have to do is just not have it start at zero. All that radical arguments I'm making, the only thing really I'm saying is there's got to be some sort of minimum. There's a physical basis to voluntary trade, and you don't take that into account where people start. You can't really even talk about a voluntary exchange economy. But it has radical effects. How will it change the market economy if you give this power to the people individually and collectively to have the power to say no to jobs and working conditions and marriage situations they don't have? So none of that, that's all the difference in tone. None of this fundamentally is different than things Andrew Yang is saying. But one thing that I do say at least differently is when I talk about automation. Because I think there's a right way and there's a wrong way to talk about the relationship between automation and basic income. And I want to talk about that a little bit right now. He gets sometimes into what I think is the wrong way. I think the wrong way is to focus on the need for UBI that automation might create in the future when it replaces all jobs. I think that is the wrong way to talk about automation and UBI. I think the right way is to focus on the automation-related reasons why we need basic income right now and why it's long overdue. So the wrong way, and let me tell you why I think the wrong way is wrong. You're saying, okay, someday robots are going to replace all labor or all working class labor. Well, even though this is a realistic possibility, a lot of people will not believe you when you say it's real. So you spend all your time trying to convince them that really this could happen. And you can say, look, in 1910, more horses had jobs in New York City than at any other time in history. 5,000 years since the domestication of the horse. And automation had always created more jobs for horses. And then one day, by 1920, there was hardly a horse in New York that had a job, except for like handsome calves and riot control. That's all they were good for anymore. And out there at Aqueduct, at the horse racing. That was it. And a motorcycle will beat him every time, just for the kids. But you got to explain that. Then you got to go explain that, and people still don't believe it. They're like, well, I'm smarter than horses, So it's hard to get people to believe it, even if it is a realistic possibility. But it gives them immediate reason to say, okay, well, someday when that happens, when all the jobs are gone, then we can have your basic income. It gives them that response right away. And Another problem with this argument is that this automation, it might not happen as fast as we think it would. It will, and if it doesn't happen as fast as we're saying, it can drive people away. Do you know that in the 1960s, when the guaranteed income movement had a wave of support, some of that was being driven by the same automation argument. Robert Theobald had several books on the triple revolution. It got a lot of important people involved, and it was important to the movement. But it didn't happen the way they said it was going to happen, and that turned people away eventually. Now, another problem with it is that automation, you know how they say drowning doesn't look like drowning? Well, automation doesn't look like automation. It doesn't look like what you think it's going to look like. People think, okay, you automate some jobs and unemployment goes up. You automate some more jobs and unemployment goes up. So we'll know when automation is happening because we'll just have larger and larger unemployment. And that's not what happens. What it does is it increases inequality. It increases uncertainty. It decreases economic mobility. It increases the leverage that employers have over employees, and it creates situations where people have to do things like gig work and contingent labor. And this kind of stuff is happening now. Automation is a problem right now, and it's been a problem for workers for a long time. Not because there's something wrong with automation. Automation's a good thing. The way we let it affect our lives for those of us who are dependent on labor to survive is wrong. So I believe the right way to talk about automation is to talk about how it disrupts the labor market and how it disrupts people's lives, even if it creates more jobs than it destroys, as it has been doing for the last 200 or 250 years as we've gone through the industrial revolutions. You know, the Luddite movement talked to, they knew this in the 1820s when they went around smashing textile mills. They weren't afraid that there weren't going to be any jobs. They were just angry because they had good, skilled, middle-class jobs, and suddenly they all had to go to the city and beg to become somebody's domestic servants for no pay and room and board, because that's the only thing they were skilled for. That's what automation is doing to people right now. You work your whole life to get this skill. You're 50 years old. You're not that far from employment, and they say your skills are not needed. And you go back into the lowest wage labor market there is. So that's a negative reason, is that it's causing all these disruptions that harm people for the rest of their lives. Now, and it wasn't just the Luddites in the 1820s. A lot of them went to their cities, and maybe their children, maybe their grandchildren were eventually better off because of automation in the late Victorian era. Wages and working conditions were finally going up after 100 years of decline, and they caught back and probably beat what they were in the 1750s. But several generations of people did not recover. The people who were out there in the Luddite movement, smashing those textiles mills, they never recovered. Many of their children did not recover, and they shouldn't have to suffer like that for their grandchildren, while other people are getting all the benefits right now. Now, what we told you is that I already mentioned about these Federal Reserve Board statistics about how our economy has doubled in the last 50 years, our economic output. A lot of this has to do with automation, and we've all helped. If you've done any work since 1978, you've done something that has helped this economy double in size. But most people haven't gotten either a pay raise or shorter work hours since the 1970s. If you look at distribution of income statistics, most people are right where they were then. And the 1% has scooped up just about all the gains. The way we distributed the benefits from automation is exceedingly unfair. And we've done that by putting workers in this position where they have to take whatever job is necessary. And that makes it really difficult to get your employer to share income. So automation means we need UBI. And it means, in fact, that UBI is long overdue. We need it to protect normal people from disruptions caused by automation. We need it to help just about everybody get their share of the benefits of automation that we've all helped create since the 1970s. We need it to counteract the imbalance of power that automation has created between the ownership, the people who own everything, and the rest of us. In fact, we've needed UBI because of automation, at least for the last 200 years. It is long overdue. It's not something about the distant future when jobs disappear. It's something we need right here and right now. That is the connection. That is the most important connection between automation and basic income. Thanks a lot. So I have saved something for this. Now we go to the question and answers, and I saved myself a little present for the question and answer section. All right. So here we go. And since this is not an academic seminar, I will entertain not only questions but also just comments. If people just want to make a comment, and somebody else should moderate. I always think that the person who talks should never moderate. Does somebody else want to call on people? Who's got questions? Emily.
When people ask, like, so what is the difference, the important difference between social programs helping people and then UBI just giving money to people? Like,
there's one really big difference, is the absence of judgment. Is that if you're for basic income, you don't want to judge people. It's just stop judging, start helping. Is that we got to give up this idea that people who are privileged are better and know better than everybody else. That they know what's wrong with the other people, and they know what the other people need to do to prove themselves. And of course, the first thing that everybody else is supposed to do to prove themselves is to work for the more privileged. So it's a really self-serving idea of what we need people to prove themselves. And we have very few programs that don't have that judgment. The minimum of Social Security is very low if you haven't proven yourself by working. Even the one program that we have that you get just because you're poor, without having to prove that you're disabled or unemployed or something, that doesn't have any other conditions with it, is the refundable tax credit. There's a refundable child tax credit, which is really small. And then there's food stamps. But food stamps have a different kind of judgment. Food stamps say, oh, okay, this one, we're not going to ask you to prove anything by working for it. So we're just going to say, you don't know what to spend your money on, because we're better than you are. And there are very few people that don't know what their basic needs are. Believe me, I used to live in the East Village. I knew heroin addicts, okay? The heroin addicts, yeah, they bought their drugs every day. They also, you didn't see them starving to death or not buying their, what is it heroin addicts need other than heroin? The laxatives. They know they need those laxatives as much as they need the heroin, okay? There are very few people who just starve themselves to death because they are such poor judges of that. And most of the poor are not heroin addicts. Most of the poor are people who are as smart and capable as everybody else and live in an unfair world. So that's the big difference. It's absence of care.
Leah, I think, had a question there.
Thanks for coming. I heard you say something on a video where you said that, I'm going to screw it up, but I'll try my best. It was just like that the biggest challenge for society is to not further oppress people who are already disadvantaged. And you mentioned something about totally false social contracts between women and men. Mm-hmm. And I'm just curious what you mean. Well,
okay, that is, wow, you're getting deep into my theory. I'm an over-ambitious philosopher who is, I've written a book called Prehistoric Myths in Modern Political Philosophy that argues that the prevailing theory justifying government is full of crap, and the prevailing theory The prevailing theory justifying private property is also full of crap. I have another book arguing that they're full of crap, and then two other books. One's, some of these are finished and some of them aren't. Building up my own theories. I'm trying to knock down existing theories of justice, building up, and you're going into like the deepest end of that. Okay, is that an idea that justifies, also, most questions you can ask me related to basic income are something that I have a speech about. So